I'm going to show you how to attach inseam pockets to this dress. For this step, you're going to refer to page 5, step 3 of your PDF pattern. You will have 4 pockets to work with, and the first thing you need to do is finish the edges of all 4 pockets. You will do that not while it's attached to the pattern, to the dress, but by themselves. So there are 2 ways to do it. You could either zigzag around the edges, and I've already zigzagged around these 2 pockets, or you can serge around the edges. Now you're only finishing the curve, you're leaving the straight edge unfinished. I've done one of them, but I wanted to show you how to do another one on the serger, because sometimes it's a little tricky to serge around a curve, especially such a tight curve as this, but it's totally doable. So let's go do this right now. What I do when I'm on the serger and I'm serging around tight curves is I lift the presser foot as many times as I need to, and I pivot. And it's okay if you serge a little bit off the edge. Nobody will ever see these pockets. So let's just get started right now. Go slowly and steady around the edge. Once you see the fabric starting to pucker a little bit, lift the presser foot, pivot a little bit. Make sure your needles are down when you lift the presser foot, or else your fabric could completely shift out of place. And I'm going super slow, but this is necessary around tight curves to get a nice finished edge. Again, my fabric is starting to pucker a little bit, so I'm going to lift the presser foot, pivot a little bit, take a few more stitches, then lift again, pivot, and then lift again, pivot. And you get the idea. We'll do this all the way down. I need to make sure the needles are down when I do this. Pivot, and then lift and pivot. And we're almost at the end. I think the rest of it we can do without pivoting. You can serge right off the edge and trim it. And now you'll see you have a nice finished edge. You can actually trim these serger tails. They're all going to get sewn in, so you won't run a chance of it unraveling or anything. And if you'd like, you can press. I always like to press everything after I serge it, just because sometimes those edges get a little bit curled up. So now we have 4 fully finished pocket pieces, so it's time to install them on the dress, attach them. So in the very first chapter, you learned how to notch these pocket positioning marks. You have 2 of them on the front and you have 2 of them on the back. So you want to position your pockets so that top corner. Now remember, your pockets always have to face down like this, because as you know, when you insert your hands into a dress or a skirt, you're always inserting them down, not up. So you want to make sure you have these mirrored pockets like this, facing down. You'll do the same thing on the back. So make sure that you align that top corner of the pocket with that little notch that you made on the side, and you can pin it in place. It's very important that you align those, because if not, by the time you match up the front to the back, the pockets might not be aligned if you don't do this part. So we're just going to place a couple of pins here. And we're going to do the same thing. Make sure that notch is right there. And by the way, I mentioned before that my lining doesn't really have a wrong side or a right side. If your lining does, or if you're using a printed fabric, you want to make sure that the right side of your fabric is up against the right side of the front panel. So right sides together. You want the wrong sides of your pockets facing up. So there's that one, and now we're going to do the same thing with the back panel. Find your positioning notch right there, and go ahead and pin that. Everybody likes to pin differently. Some people pin parallel to the edge, other people pin perpendicular. This is the way I learned it, so you know, you do what you know, and if it works for you, then again, there is no right or wrong way. And there we go. We have everything nicely pinned. So what we're going to do next is sew a 1/2 inch from the edge, just where the pocket is. You do not have to sew from top to bottom, just where the pocket is. Sew a 1/2 inch from the edge, and this is going to attach your pockets to the dress. So let's go ahead and do that. My machine is set to just a regular stitch length, 2.5 millimeter. And I like to backstitch or lock stitch at the beginning and the end. Every machine is different, so whatever your machine has for reinforcing those stitches, that's what you'll do. Have all of our pockets attached to the dress right now. So the next step is to finish the side edges of both the front and the back panel. So to do that, you can either use a serger or a zigzag stitch. We're going to go from the bottom to where the underarm seam starts. You do not have to go all the way around. We're just finishing those side seams so that we can attach the panels together in the next step. So let's go ahead and take this to the serger. Once you have all of your side seams finished, either with a serger or a zigzag stitch, the next step is to understitch these pockets. Now, understitching is very much like top stitching. As a matter of fact, I like to use the same stitch length, like a 3.5 millimeter. And what understitching does is it will keep those pockets nicely tucked inside your dress. We're going to press it down like this. So if your kid likes to put a lot of things in their pockets, or like is constantly taking their hands in and out of the pocket, they won't come out of the garment. They'll stay nicely tucked in. So that's why their understitching is so important. So the way we do it is make sure you press your pocket out, leaving all the seam allowances facing out, just like I'm doing right here. So press it out nice, get a nice crease right there. Do that on all 4 sides. So we're gonna do 2 in the front, and we'll do 2 in the back, like this. Pressing is key right here. Oops. There we go. Yeah. So I will switch my sewing machine to a longer stitch length. You can choose whatever stitch length you prefer. And then all we're going to do is understitch or top stitch in between the seam allowance. So see where your seam is right here, and the end of your seam allowance, your serged or zigzag edge is right here. Somewhere in between those 2 edges, that's where you're going to understitch. So I would guesstimate about 1/8. If you've done this with a perfect 1/2 inch seam allowance, you're going to put it at a 1/4 inch away, but mine is a little bit closer because my serger blade trimmed about 1/8 of an inch off. So we're going to understitch about 1/8 of an inch away from the edge. So that's what we're doing right here. Wonderful. All of our pockets are now under stitch, and as you see, it won't lift up and come out of your sides anymore. So now we will place our back panel over the front panel and make sure all of your sides are nicely aligned. This means pockets, and you can go ahead and trim some of these serged edges too so they're not in the way. All these thread tails. There you go. So we will pin your side seams from the underarm edge all the way to the bottom, including the pocket. So you will use a ton of pins for this, but that's okay because you want these to be perfectly aligned, or else the dress will not end up looking or wearing so nice, because your pockets will be a little bit misaligned, and that is not good. As you see, our pockets, since we did such a good job at pinning and serging and getting everything aligned, our pocket starts at the right spot right here. Put a pin right where those two pockets align. Put another pin at the end here of the pockets, leaving that center space open because that is the opening of our pocket. And now we are pinning all around the edge, the rounded edge of our pockets. And you can put pins at the bottom right here where your hem is going to be. And then right up here too. Do the same thing on the other side. Now we have all sides pinned, and the next step is just to sew a 1/2 inch from the edge, and you will start at the underarm seam, and you will stitch 1/2 inch into where the pocket is, and then all the way around the pocket, again staying a 1/2 inch away from the edge. You will stitch into the side and then all the way down. So essentially you are creating that shape that forms the pockets that will eventually end up inside the dress. And since all of our edges are already finished, you will not have to serge after this. This is really the end of this step. So we will go and set our machine to a regular stitch length and stitch around. And the important thing is, though, when you get to these corners where the pocket meets the side seam, it's important to reinforce those stitches, just because sometimes, you know, kids can be a little rough with their garments, and if they're sticking their hands in and out of the pockets a lot, they might come undone. So you want to, what I like to do is just back stitch and stitch over those stitches pretty much 2 or 3 times, just so it's nicely reinforced. And then when you get to the end, again, you back stitch. So let's go ahead and do that right now. I'm lining the edge up with my 1/2 inch mark, and I already have my machine set to my regular stitch length, so let's stitch. As you see, I am stitching 1/2 inch in, and then I will back stitch a couple of times just to reinforce this corner. That's a very important step. I will pivot, lift your presser foot with your needle down, you pivot this way towards the pocket, and then again reinforce those stitches by stitching 2 or 3 times over the same stitches. So you just back stitch, you go back and forth a couple of times, just to make sure you have a nice, very strong corner right there. And then you stitch 1/2 inch away from the edge on those pockets. If you're having trouble around these corners, you can pivot like we did when we were serging, lifting up the presser foot while the needle is still down, and then pivoting to get a nice smooth curve. So now I'm nearing my corner again, and I will do the same thing I did at the top. I'm going to back stitch a couple of times, back stitch and forward stitch, just to reinforce that corner. Lift the presser foot, pivot all the way towards the bottom. Reinforce again, back stitch and forward stitch. You want those corners nice and strong. And then stitch all the way down. Reinforce the end. Here it is, your side seam is finished, so now you repeat the same on the other side. Yay, your side seams are pretty much put together, so now you can turn your dress right side out just to test out those pockets, and you'll see how they pretty much stay inside. They didn't even try to pull out. You can go in here and you can insert your hands and make sure those pockets are nicely tucked in there. And at this point, I really like to take it over to the iron and just press that side seam just so it's nice and perfect right there. Look at it. You can feel where the edge of the pocket is. And you can actually use your fingers to sort of move the fabric away from that seam. There it is. And then just give it a nice press so that those sides are ready to go for the next step. One on the other side. We'll do the same thing. Just kind of work that fabric out away from the seam on the pocket so you get a nice crisp edge. There. Perfect. That understitching is so nice. So there you have it. Your dress is almost finished. The next step is to attach the lining and do the buttonholes and hemming.